Basically, this paper confirms the fascinating observation Shlomo Wald in his book emphasizes, the rise and fall of empires and civilizations. Now it's amazing when you think about it, that almost every entity, political entity, from the tribe all the way to the largest unit of analysis, civilization, a very problematic unit of analysis, they all have shown a birth, a rise and decline, very much like the biological man. And this is really amazing. Why should a collectivity behave like an individual? There really is no, and that was the mystery that the book tried to solve. He isn't, of course, the only scholar that addressed this issue, but it's an amazing question. It's really an amazing question that this reality is so ubiquitous over time and just all over the globe. Everything is born, many things rise, and then they decline and disappear. So there's his book, so I'm not going to deal with that. But I want to look at the other side of the coin that confirms indirectly this observation. How laughable attempted political revivals and restorations have been, with one exception, of course, the Jewish people, and possibly two, because I know David Goldman, and I think he's going to talk about it, talks of the near certainty of the revival of Chinese greatness. If so, of the thousands of rises and declines of political entities, there are only two exceptions, but that's statistically very, very significant. Well, we all know about the first exception. The one is ordained by God. I have a very different perspective from Wald's. It's not an academic perspective. The people of Israel will rise and fall, and will rise and fall until they fulfill the law that will usher in the Messiah. That's what I believe. I can't really prove it, but you heard a different interpretation. And as to the contemporary Chinese Renaissance, that may be due to the short time China declined. It was rather a lull rather than a fall. Everywhere else, the claims to national and imperial renaissance, the recreation of former greatness, have not only failed to materialize, but they've really proven laughable. And I'm just going to give a few examples. We can look at the Greek Hellenic revival. It was called the Megali idea, the great idea. It was an irredentist concept of Greek nationalism that came into being soon after the creation of the newly formed Greek state in 1830 that was dismembered from, of course, the Ottoman Empire. The vision was to restore the Byzantine Empire. Now, the Byzantine Empire perceived itself as Roman, but basically it became Greek. Greek became the language, and of course the new Greeks found an affinity in the old Byzantine Greek. And they perceived that Greece was going to expand into the Ionian Sea to the west, the Asia Minor and Black Sea to the east, and from Thrace, Macedonia, and Epirus to the north, to Crete and Cyprus to the south. In fact, in the 1840s, most Greeks were convinced that it wasn't Athens that was going to be the capital of Greece, it was going to be Constantinople. And we all know what became of that vision. I mean, it really looks laughable. The first hit in the face was in 1897 when a Prussian modernized Ottoman army thwarted the Greeks. And then, of course, in the disastrous intervention, Greek intervention in the aftermath of the Ottoman Empire between 1919 and 1922 to give birth to Turkey, I think the second third world country, if we can use nomenclature from today, to succeed against Western forces, the Greeks and the French. And 170 years later, after this great Megali idea, Greece is fighting for its existence, demographically, economically, and is facing an increasingly powerful Turkey that will probably devour parts of it in the near future. Then we can also look at another example, also ridiculous, but people believed in it. That was Italian fascism and the revival of Roman civilization and empire. Fascis, the word from which fascist is derived, means bundles of birch or elm rods with an axe projecting from one end. Mussolini really thought that he was resurrecting the Roman Empire. He called his shock troops fasci di combattimento, before they were better known as squadristi, the black shirts who fought the communists. Maybe we don't remember, but Mussolini even created a new timeline, and he called it the era fascista. And 1932 became XEF. The bourgeois handshake was replaced by the Roman salute, and the youth movement ranks were given unit titles from the classical Roman army. And there was a tremendous archaeological and architectural drive to replicate the Roman Empire. Well, the Roman Empire lasted from 31 BCE all the way to 476 ACE. That's slightly more than 500 years. Mussolini's lasted from 1922 to 1943, 21 years. And no one in Italy anymore is thinking that Italy is in any way a revival of the Roman Empire. And then, of course, we can go to an example that is probably better known to the audience, but equally laughable: Pan-Arabism. It was Sati al-Husri who best summarized the goals of Arab nationalism. People who spoke a unitary language have one heart and a common soul. As such, they constitute one nation, and so they have to have a unified state. And he was always being asked. He was the Minister of Education in Iraq. So after the defeat of the 7 Arab armies, of course, he was one of the great intellectuals of the Arab reawakening, the restoration of the great Arab people from Muhammad's time. And he was asked, how were we defeated by this diaspora people? So he said, and when they were attacked by 7 Arab states, and he always answered, it's because they were attacked by 7 Arab states, and they weren't attacked by one state. And of course, the Ba'ath Party concurred. The Arabs form one nation. The nation has a natural right to live in a single state. And one of its founders, Michel Aflaq, connected this Arab vision of unity to what Muhammad did in the 7th century, and his commanders later spread the faith to even to much of Europe. And he perceived. Yet by 1963, we all know that Arab nationalism had its heyday more or less in the nationalization of the canal. But by 1963, 2 years after the great experiment of Arab unity, the United Arab Republic, which was wiped out by an officer's coup, already by 1963, basically Gamal Abdel Nasser, the famous champion and the hero of Arab nationalism, already realized that it wasn't going to be, there wasn't going to be a unified Arab state, and he called for cooperation. And this was 1 year before another pinnacle in Arab nationalism, the convening of the First Unity Summit meeting in January 1964. And of course, we all realize when Pan-Arabism came to an end in 1967, when Israel defeated the Arab armies, and Fuad Ajami was dead right in his seminal article in Foreign Affairs in 1978, when he entitled his article, "The End of Pan-Arabism." So the Arabs in the 50s were convinced that they were going to restore the great unity of the early Islamic period. And today, I think maybe the Arab states are exiting, there is a threat that they are exiting from history. Yet another example of how laughable restoration and revival usually is. And it only confirms the idea that entities, from the smallest to the largest, are born, live, and die. So the idea of political revivalism, restoring historical greatness, came on hard times. I think by the 1970s, no one was talking about words that were very passionately believed in at the heyday of nationalism. But there is one area in the world where this concept, this goal, this project is still alive and kicking, and that's the Middle East. The Middle East is probably the only place that I know where people are still thinking of revivalism. Islamist revivalism, much of it murderous, is alive and kicking. Just look at the latest incarnation, the Islamic State, and the headlines it's been making. Imperial revivalism has also picked up in the ideologies of the Islamic Republic of Iran and President Erdogan and his Prime Minister Ahmed Davutoglu, who was a professor of international relations. And the question about these revivals, especially the Islamic State and like-minded organizations, will they look more like the early Muslim conquests or the laughable revivals that we mentioned above? Are they going to follow that same failed route? So one of the wonderful features of Wald's book, I'm a good pupil. I really thought that we were going to talk about the book, so I read it. And I think one of the highlights of the book is to show how preposterous to what preposterous extent the greatest historians failed to predict strategic developments even in the near future. I mean, he really brings gems. One of them, from Toynbee, is that he believed in the militarization of the agricultural class. I mean, we can't even understand what he's talking about. And he believed that India and Egypt would turn into great military powers. I also think, I looked for it afterwards in the book, that Toynbee predicted that Russia was going to be the great power of the 21st century. That same Russia that has a GNP of equal to Belgium and is a totally extractive economy. So to what extent is this revival going to be different or part of the pattern? I can only say that the great rise of the Arabs occurred when the two great empires, the Christian Orthodox Byzantine Empire and the Sassanid, exhausted each other in prolonged combat. This is not the same with the Islamic revivalists in the Middle East. They face an entirely different terrain. Two major centers of opposition, Iran and Turkey, and this is the crucial difference, whose leadership feel that They possess the true the true Islamic vision. And I think that that's the key difference. When Muhammad propagated the faith, and when that propagation of the faith created the empire, it was juxtaposed to Sassanid ideology and religion, and to the Byzantine religion. But here we have empires, would-be empires, against a would-be civilization, competing over the same ideological and theological turf. And I think that that's a crucial difference. However universal the Islamist fundamentalist project may be, and to most it seems very threatening, it is likely to flounder against the centrifugal pulls of the identity of the ethnie and the lust for empire, again which the Islamic State or any other fundamentalist movement has no remedy. And paradoxically, it is the theocratic urges the present rulers of Iran and Turkey displays, in addition to their nationalism and imperialism, that only intensifies the rivalry between the three. And all of this, and I still haven't mentioned the fourth force, and that's, of course, the Arab states, theocratic Saudi Arabia and secular Egypt, who are united, or are trying to unite, both to stave off the imperialist, revivalist designs of Turkey and the Islamic Republic of Iran. I heard the most fascinating presentation of a Turkish architect with an Israeli scholar about how Erdogan is building these great Islamic mosques in Turkey, which replicate mosques in 19th century Abdul Hamid the Second's era. And where does he build these mosques? Right up the face of the secular upper middle class neighborhoods. He places them exactly where they're hated most. So what all this means is that all three or four are balancing each other in what looks like to be a very long, protracted conflict. So I see that I'm coming to an end. And of course, we see this protracted conflict. It's already being played out. In June 2014, it seemed like the Islamic State was going to usher in the Muhammad's era. Well, since then, it's had setbacks, but it's also continues to kick against its rivals. And I would say that now with the American-Iranian detente, what's going to happen is that this conflict is going to become even more protracted, because now Iran will have added assets to provide even more fuel to the conflict between the Islamist revivalists and the Iranian imperialist drive. So in short, the mountain of Islamist revival may turn into a molehill, like so many other attempted revivals that have been in the past. A molehill that, in terms of as a civilizational process, but of course, a lot of gushing blood until they arrive at that outcome. And I would just end in the idea that I think the Islamic State even knows this. It knows that it can't truly revive the vision of Muhammad. And how do I know it? Because it calls itself the Islamic State. It doesn't call itself the Islamic Caliphate. The moment it calls itself the Islamic State, it means that it's trying to bargain with the world system of states over a piece of territory. It still hasn't fully acknowledged that, but all fundamentalism, all radicalism is generally open to some moderation. We saw it in the transition of the Wahhabi movement into a conservative Saudi Arabian state, and we're likely to see this as well in the Islamic State, in the Islamic State and other revivalist movements.